this episode of Suspect Zero.
The case of David Parker Ray, aka the Toy Box Killer.
Nature sometimes holds the answers to questions we are unable to answer. She holds secrets that many of us wouldn't be able to handle, so she remains silent. This might be why many people choose to live in seclusion or isolated from the chaos of society. They choose a more simplified kind of life where peace, quiet, and solitude are natural resources, and no one takes that for granted. This way of living was perfect for David Parker Ray and girlfriend Cindy Hendy, who by all accounts were the perfect couple. Isolation was crucial to their plight and served as a backdrop to their private hobbies. What their hobbies included, however, would stun the average person, yet to them, it was an acceptable daily way of life. This episode will focus on David Parker Ray, who is known as the Toy Box Killer. His truck trailer, or what he called his toy box, was used to kidnap his victims, and depending on whether they complied or not, would dictate the ending to their stories. Welcome to Suspect Zero, where we not only discuss cold cases, but serial killers whose crimes are lesser known or virtually unknown. I'm Dawn Washburn, and joining me is my co-host, Dr. Michael Arntfield. Hello, Michael.
Hey, Don. Great intro to a case I can pretty much guarantee few, if any, of our listeners and viewers have heard of, and yet one that, as you alluded to, sort of encompasses and encapsulates so many very important teachings in criminology and psychopathy.
Amazing. And I've never heard of this case before. So when I started researching it, I have so much to say, just a lot to say about this.
Yeah, Parker is sort of a composite or a microcosm of so many other better known serial killers, including, I mean, the schematic drawings of what he wanted to do, the disordered, disrupted childhood with the abusive father that introduces him to BDSM, pornography, and then cultivates these various violent paraphilias, the recruitment of an assisting, submissive partner. He's technically a team killer, or they are a team killer by definition, so two or more offenders in tandem, one with a sort of a dominant alpha personality, one typically who is submissive. The specially designed trailer, the specifics in terms of his having his victims listen to certain things or read certain things. I mean, this, and we'll talk about some other lesser known killers that he has emulated, so to speak. But I mean, you think of the Hillside Stranglers, you think of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. I mean, again, teen killers who are better known and yet pale in comparison to just the sheer weirdness of Parker.
Yeah. Now, few things that I kind of picked up on him was he was very well. First, let's address the tapes. So he records these tapes for the women to listen to, and I'm speechless. If no one has read this, they need to read it. I mean, just for the sake of us being clean on a clean version of this podcast, I can't even go into the details of what he planned out for these women, but oh my God. And I thought to myself, if I were taken and I had to listen to that tape on how he outlined exactly, I mean, from point A all the way to Z, what he was going to do, what the plan was. You knew what you were in for because he told you what you were in for. And as long as you remained docile and you complied with everything that he wanted you to do, your life would remain intact. He would drug you and you would forget everything that happened and where you were. And then he would drop you off on the side of the road for you to go get whatever help you needed to get. But if you were a screamer or somebody who couldn't handle what was going on, your fate was definitely going to be in his hands in a very different way. Unbelievable. I don't, even when I started reading it, I couldn't put it down because I wanted to really feel what these women felt. And I don't even, terrifying is a kind word. Terrifying is a kind word to describe what he said to these women and what his plan was for them, and actually what he carried out. I'm speechless about it. I don't even know how to talk about it because it was that horrific. During his childhood, David Parker Ray and his younger sister Peggy lived with their disciplinarian grandfather. He was sporadically visited by his violent alcoholic father, who would supply him with magazines depicting sadomasochistic pornography. At Mountain Air High School in Mountain Air, New Mexico, he was also bullied by his peers for his shyness around girls. His sexual fantasies of raping, torturing, and even murdering women developed during his teenage years. Around this time, his sister discovered his sadomasochistic drawings, as well as pornographic photographs of bondage acts. After completing high school, he received an honorable discharge from the U.S. Army, where his service also included work as a general mechanic. Ray was divorced 4 times and had 2 children, including his accomplice daughter, Jessie Ray. Ray soundproofed a truck trailer, which he called his toy box, and equipped it with items used for sexual torture. He would kidnap between 5 and 6 girls a year, holding each of them captive for around 3 to 4 months. During this period, he would sexually abuse his victims, sometimes involving his dog or his girlfriend, who participated willingly in his crimes, and often torture them with surgical instruments. Then Ray would either kill his victims or drug them with barbiturates in an attempt to erase their memories of what had happened before abandoning them by the side of the road. Ray was convicted of kidnapping and torture in 2001, for which he received a lengthy sentence, but he was never convicted of murder. He died of a heart attack about 1 year after his convictions in 2 cases, the second of which resulted in a plea deal.
And maybe he would drop you off. Maybe he would spare your life. Again, we don't know. And what's just as terrifying is this wasn't that long ago for there to be zero. Again, this is the whole purpose of this podcast. Zero media or historical footprint for this case, where we don't know how many women he killed. We know of these few. We know of these few that he released. There seems to be no appetite to go looking for, among law enforcement, or go looking for the other victims. And at the time, certainly, no appetite whatsoever to link, abduction and assault cases where victims were released with cases where victims are never found, or cases where victims are found belatedly or much after the fact. So I mean, you've got this patchwork of, and this just goes to show how during this period, unwittingly, it seems, offenders exploited just these jurisdictional loopholes, and the fact that all cases were basically carried out, investigations were carried out on paper, and programs like the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP, were in their nascence and not really very effective. So, but no one, it seems, was the gatekeeper in terms of saying, hey, like keeping law enforcement sort of on point and making sure that people like him, were tracked. So, I mean, these recordings is like you mentioned, that brings this case to a whole other level. This is a weird variation on what we've seen other offenders do in terms of make victims recite things, record victims while they're being assaulted and raped and tortured. This is a new level of sadism, and a specific variation of sadism known as acousticophilia. And there's some variations in the spelling and pronunciation, but basically, as it sounds, an erotic fascination with usually, for sadistic purposes, specific sounds, which can include, obviously the sounds of victims screaming or pleading for their lives. I mean, a really weird, just to digress quickly, a really well-known example, another suspect zero, lesser-known serial killer, child sex killer, John Joubert, as a teen, as his, again, sadistic sort of proclivities were crystallizing as they were with Parker, he had this recurring fantasy of someone saying to him, just get it over with. If you're going to do it, just get it over with. And that, the sound of someone begging him to do that became sort of the driving force for his crimes then later in life. And whether or not he actually got his victims to say that or not, or just the arousal of them maybe saying that was enough to target, We'll never know. He was put to death. But in this case, the toy box killer, there seems to be a combination of listening to his own words. So I can guarantee you, he would have been within earshot when those recordings were being played, and he would have derived great pleasure in hearing his own voice reciting those words about what he was going to do to them, and then watching their reaction when his victims realized what they were in store for. So, I mean, absolute power with the most obviously malevolent and cruel of intentions.
Right. And he said, I can't have sex with a woman unless I'm hurting her or she's in pain. Um, there's a lot of people who are into BDSM, which is fine. So it's kind of strange, why can't you just find someone who's into it? And then seems like his girlfriend was really into it. I mean, it wasn't that he couldn't stop there. And then to pick up these women, and he even said it would be like 2 or 3 women at a time sometimes, and depending on what he felt at the moment. And then also bringing animals into this. I mean, our audience has to read it if they can handle the content. If you can't handle the content, do not even read it. But I'll post something on our page to allude to where you need to go. I'll direct you. And also another thing was the FBI, once all of his things were cleaned out, had found all these miscellaneous, I guess, trophies that he had taken from the women. So we're also going to put on the website those trophies, because a lot of them are linked to missing people. And the FBI wants to know if you have a missing person or know a missing person in the Arizona, New Mexico area, or, the surrounding areas, this jewelry or these things that were taken could be theirs. So if you're able to identify something, we're going to put that on the Suspect Zero website as well, on Facebook and Instagram. So you'll be able to see what's missing if you live in that surrounding area and know anyone who might be missing. It's profound. I mean, I think this case, I mean, and they're all disturbing, but you never really know what a killer does in a room with a victim unless the victim gets away and can describe it. And when you hear it, it's just unbelievable. But this goes beyond belief of what your intentions are with these women. I feel like I don't know. I always say, like, how would I handle that? What would I do? You're just speechless. I don't even know how to talk about this guy, because it was so horrific what he said to them. And enlisting, his daughter was enlisted in it as well.
Yeah, which adds, again, in terms of team killers, this guy is sort of dabbling in every subtype and typology in terms of an intimate partner as an accomplice, a daughter as an accomplice, and then a dog as an accomplice. I mean, this is why I think that he's a suspect zero still. Is you're very limited in terms of conventional media, in terms of how you can tell this story. No cable true crime series would touch this, because there's no way to tell it in a PG format, really. I mean, and we're dancing around certain topics, but and obviously we fearlessly approach cases that others won't, cover. But this is in part why, I mean, like you said, you are well versed in. I mean, I've got a pretty good catalog of obscure serial killers, but and lesser known cold cases, obviously. But I mean, so do you, and this was an outlier of outliers for you.
I wasn't even sure. I'm like, I don't even know how we're going to explain this to the audience without. All right, let me give them some hints. That way it'll kind of, so extremely, extremely sexual. I mean, the content itself is giving instructions to the victims on what his needs are. First of all, all right, it's a sex slave contract, but written in such a way that it's unbelievable in what he actually says to them. It's something that you can't even repeat. But he says that you need to call the mistress, master or mistress, whoever, and then you need to get on your hands and knees, and the dog is involved and the mistress is
I
involved.
don't think, and I mentioned this case earlier, I don't think there's any question, and perhaps we'll never know, but he has to have taken inspiration from Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, who about 20 years earlier, I'm just ballparking because we don't know the full span of his crimes, but certainly by the time he was operating and had built his quote unquote toy box, Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were known to the public. Their first victims, first known victims, believe it or not, were a couple who had placed a classified ad selling a home video camera. And they saw the ad, they wanted the camera so they could document their future torture and serial killing sessions. So they killed this couple, took the camera, and I raise this because you mentioned, few if any killers do we know of exactly what went on during their crimes. And Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, number one, recorded everything they did, and those recordings were recovered, most of them. They also had a torture chamber with a list of rules or a contract, including what the victims would have to call their captors, and also sketched ahead of time what they wanted to do. So again, all of these behaviors, which are pretty specific in some cases and methodical, show up in Parker's case. So, I mean, is it a coincidence? Maybe. Is the fact that it's in the Southwest United States and employs almost identical methodologies, is this, again, including the team killing aspect, having an accomplice, right. Did it draw direct inspiration from Lake and Ng? Almost certainly.
I agree with that. And also, I think that there's a time when, you're looking at the other killer. I can only assume that you're looking at the other killers and you're like, I can perfect this. I'm not gonna get caught, and I'm gonna make sure that there's a way the victim can't talk if I really let her go. And I use her for what I need her for, and then I let her go, and she won't be able to talk if I do ... So that would decrease my chances of getting caught, because maybe I'm not murdering as much, or maybe I'm avoiding. But I think they use the other serial killers and the other rapists almost as a book of what not to do and what not to get caught, how not to get caught. So I agree with that. So the copycatting for sure, but it's instilled in him to be this way. But at the same time, he's trying to figure out a way to not be the person who got caught like the rest. So I completely see that. Improve
on the techniques of
right.
predecessors. So that's interesting, because people will often ask me, well, why would a sadistic sexual serial murderer arbitrarily release some victims and not others? And often those decisions are very subjective and come down to a set of processes that only the killer will know. And in this case offers some insight into that, whereby you're right, depending on, as he spends time with this captive, depending again what his accomplice, whether it's his partner or his daughter, sort of tell him, or the information that they glean from the victim, he may be actually making a very calculated set of decisions in terms of, if I kill this person, people are going to come looking. Whereas if they turn up weeks later, sexually assaulted, but vague on the details, I mean, let's be honest, that may not even get reported to police. Yeah, we're having a hard time solving cases as it is. So I think he knew that. And even when you see his pictures in the courtroom, he's like smirking, and it's almost like he's just not even taking, like, I'm not going to get caught for it. He's like that overly confident. I'm not getting caught for doing this. I mean, what have I really done? I've carried out a fantasy, really. And this takes us back to our first case, Israel Keys, where life is a zero-sum game for sexual sadists. Every day is spent foraging for new twisted experiences, and if it all ends tomorrow, then in the meantime, they lived fast and died young, and this is all just a big joke, including the lives of other people. And that's why, I mean, it's not surprising that you see this cavalier attitude when they're finally caught, because as you said, yeah, they did what they wanted to do, and their life at the end of the day is as trivial as those that they've taken. And in the meantime, if they got to fully experience or live with intensity, again, as Israel Keyes was inspired by the novel of the same name, then so be it. I mean, and this goes back to, again, I've talked about this in other episodes, well-known scholarship on psychopaths. And not all sadists are psychopaths, not all psychopaths are sadists, but again, a deadly cocktail when you mix the two. And we already know that psychopaths are defined by a short life history. They consume and progress through life as much and as quickly as possible in order, again, to get the most mileage out of their life while they're young and attractive and agile and strong, and they could really care less if they die of substance-related causes or of lethal injection in their 40s, because it's all about between now and what they can do next week.
And how manipulating is he that he can find a woman? I mean, most people can't even find a date. He finds a woman who shares I mean, how do you convince someone to kidnap people and then do all these outlandish sexual acts to them as a couple and be okay with that? I mean,
well, and this is the question that everyone asks is, what are the odds of, when you talk about team killers, these people coming into contact, who have these shared interests? And in reality, I'm not sure that they do. Again, this is one of the hallmarks of a psychopath, is their radar for people who are vulnerable, who could be easily influenced, who can be easily controlled, and they can sense these people through social cues and other sort of nonverbal interaction, as well as just instinct. They can identify these people, and they know that they can take them under their wing, whether it be a male seeking out a female or a younger male. We see all kinds of variations. I mean, Dean Corll, the Houston Candyman killer, which maybe we should also do an episode on, but he's somewhat better known. But I mean, he was very effective in recruiting younger boys to be his accomplice. And I mean, a really fascinating case study in terms of someone who had all kinds of other options in life and was fairly well-to-do, and chose, like other sadists, murder and torture as an avocation, or as sort of a second self-defining job or hobby. And so naturally, they're going to put a great deal of mental energy and rehearsal into acquiring these accomplices, because it's not that they can't do it themselves. It's that these accomplices often are chosen, whether they be females or younger males, such as teens. They can be used as lures to acquire further victims. Having a female on board, again, we know this from Bernardo and Homolka, is disarming to perhaps a shy teenager who's offered a ride by a stranger. Well, they seem to be a happily married, normal couple. This seems, comparatively safe, and in reality, it's the opposite.
The trap. And something else that I had thought of with him is that, intimidating people too. I mean, I wonder how much he intimidated her to be involved as well. I mean, she looked like a willing participant, but one never knows if she was also a victim, and being given orders to do it as well. You just don't know. You really don't. But
well, and this is the basis for what's now known as the Svengali defense. So in reference to the literary character Svengali, who is this mind-controlling, influential, evil force who essentially casts people women in particular, under a spell, and has them do various things. The Svengali defense, and it was used most notably by one of the Boston Marathon bombers, that they were cast under the spell of someone who was abusive, who was mind controlling, whether through substances or through other gaslighting mechanisms. And they really were in a sort of a state of what we call automatism, where they didn't know what they were doing. They're basically on autopilot, and they couldn't recognize the wrongfulness or the impact of their actions. So naturally, that defense has been used in various team killing cases, and there is a certain degree of validity to it, because unquestionably, is she going to say no to Parker? Is she, once she's involved in this, never mind her legal complicity and culpability, what is her personal risk in double crossing him? And absolutely, he would have cultivated that fear and stoked that that dependency and reluctance to ever say no for months or years before the killing started in earnest.
And also what really upsets me is that he tells the victims, when our listeners read the transcript of this, he tells the victims that he has parties and these friends come over and join in on what's going on. So they see the slave there, this victim, this poor helpless victim, and no one calls the police. No one does anything. It's like everybody, and he says, well, it's on a much lighter scale. When they come over, they're not doing what we would do to you. But when they come over, they're going to be joining in, just to make sure that you're compliant as well when they do come over to party with us.
Yeah.
What goes on?
And I mean, maybe we can wrap up by talking about other potential associated cases. I mean, and this is what I don't understand is, and this is why he's such a suspect zero, I guess, is there seems to be no movement or effort to try to link unidentified remains, missing people never recovered and presumed dead or declared dead, or other cold cases to Parker's known movements. I mean, we may be talking about hundreds of victims. And we don't know how many lived, how many died, because it's just a loose patchwork of reporting across 2 states.
Right.
I mean, is there anything that you found in terms of cases known or suspected to be linked to him, not otherwise disclosed, in court or to the media?
No. And like I said, I really didn't get that deep into researching yet, but I will. I usually, after we do the podcast, then I go and do a little bit more in case we need a part 2. But what I really want to focus on are those missing items, because I think that,
well, and here's the potential link is if those items can be identified and linked to, again, people reported missing or not reported missing, and never found, presumed dead, declared dead, or victims who survived and have little to no recollection of what happened. I mean, it's never too late to start clearing these cases. Like I said, we are working through what will be, especially post-pandemic, as homicide rates are up, 60-70% in some cities, and the solved rate or the clearance rate remains static or declining in most places. We're going to have a backlog of very soon, just in the last 50 years, about a million cold cases. And someone has to start working through those. And there's a handful of groups doing that. Murder Accountability Project being, I think, at the top that we've discussed, and my group and some other groups like the VDOC Society. But that's like a few hundred people working on working on a million cases. So
well, we're also going, so when we direct people to the Facebook page, the Suspect Zero Facebook page, make sure you guys link up to that, because you'll see all the cases that we're doing. And we offer, we want you to look into this. This is why we're doing this podcast. We want extra people to be looking at this. So when you see it on the Facebook page, link into it. And you'll be able to kind of research a little bit. We may even put up some links for you to kind of go to direct you if you're kind of like an amateur at this, because I know I definitely am. But anything you could come up with will help. And anyone with an open mind and people who kind of can stretch their minds, those are the people who can help. Because I remember when you and I first met, and I was like, it's got to be this guy. And you're like, you need to, like, and then and you forced me to kind of keep my mind open about other avenues. So even when we were discussing the Springfield 3, the concrete theory is only one theory. There's many, many, many more. So you need to look at that case and look at the suspects. And so when we get to this case, we'll put some things up for people to look at, and anyone has anything they want to offer. I mean, we don't turn those comments down. So please, look into it, look at the jewelry. If you live in that surrounding area, any help. And we'll even put the police department's number on there if you have any hints or anything that could lead to tying this one or anyone to any of these cold cases. That would be amazing.
Yeah, you raise a good point, which is just a reminder that this podcast is not some vanity project. This is, sanctioned by my university, Western University, and supported and funded by it, and with the view to enlisting viewers and listeners to help solve these crimes. We're not just discussing and sort of gushing over specific cases or killers. Right. We are trying to, as I've theorized about, publishing this in my next book, there's been 4 waves of true crime since about the mid-19th century. And we're living the 4th wave now. And it's defined by a virtual format and audience interactivity, in terms of the audience creating additional supplemental content. And that includes tips and becoming engaged and involved and assisting. And like I said, we'll soon be approaching, within the next few years, it'll be 1 million unsolved cases within a 40, 50 year period, just in the US. So the more eyeballs on these cases, like you said, and you're posting those souvenirs that were recovered by the FBI, that's what this is about.
It is. And I think, one of the listeners was like, I kind of want you guys to tell the story. And I'm like, I know it's just not just about the story. They have to understand the plight of our work and the awareness we're raising for our students and for everyone listening. So the story is part of it. You could read it, but this is about just really teaching you how not to be a victim, which we say all the time, and also trying to help solve these cold cases. So this case today was pretty heavy too, Mike. Everyone we talk about is heavy, but this one, when they read it, they're gonna be like, oh my God, now we know what they were talking about. But
yeah, there's basically just an inherent trigger warning in just the title of our podcast and the content. But with that in mind, again, I would urge all viewers and listeners to please subscribe, because these are going to be coming out at a pretty quick pace with new cases and previously unheard of cases all the time. So I think those who want to help out especially need to be receiving updates as to when we're posting new content.
Right. Okay. Well, I think this about wraps it up for today. Thank you guys for listening, and see you next time on Suspect Zero.